Welcome back to another episode of Success Mindset. I am here with my friend Kadyn Wittman, Director of Development for the YMCA, State Representative for South Dakota, as well as just overall a community advocate. I'm so happy and excited to have you on today's podcast.
I'm so happy to be here, and I'm really excited to just sit with you as my friend and catch up a little bit.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, for those who don't know who you are, where have they been, tell the world a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I've been a resident of Sioux Falls for 13 years. I came here to pursue my undergrad degree at Augustana, and I graduated with a dual degree in sociology and women's studies. From there, I worked in a couple of different avenues. Most noticeably, I worked for the ACLU of South Dakota for 3 years. During the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, I worked at the Bishop Dudley Hospitality House, which kind of gave me that passion for advocating for our homeless community members, and I've carried that into my work as a state representative and as the new director of development for the YMCA.
I love it. Love it. I want to kind of start there because one
Sure.
thing that I've admired about you is people talk about humble a lot of times, and we obviously talk about humble in a way that a lot of people don't gravitate towards the right definition of it, because the definition of humble is having a lower, modest estimation of one's own importance. But you embody that in a way I think what most people aspire for, of just show up and do the work. Right. I don't need the accolades. And one thing, again, you do way more than you are wanting credit for, period. Just do the work. For you, where did that come from? Where did it come from to say, like, I want to be the voice for the voiceless? I see the needs. They're endless out there, but you are not short of number of things that you just rolled up your sleeves and says, let's do it. Let's move the needle. Where did that come from? Where's your drive in that space?
Yeah, so I've spoken about this just a little bit in regards to my political campaign, but I grew up in a family with my younger brother had some severe medical needs. So he's a quad amputee, he has no arms or legs, he's a 2-time cancer survivor, and he's nonverbal. And that's been for 26 years. And so from the entire time that he's been my younger brother since I was 6, I've had to watch my parents, who are these very quiet Midwest parents, who just, we put our heads down and we work. I've had to watch them rise to that occasion and advocate for their son who literally didn't have a voice. And they modeled for me what it means to be an engaged and proactive advocate for somebody that needs help. And I think I just kind of have carried that into my adult life. And it's funny that you're like, we just roll up our sleeves and we do the work, because to me, it doesn't feel like a big deal when I do those things, because it's just what we should do as part of this community that we live in, that we work in, that we engage with. It is our responsibility as individuals to contribute to the well-being of that community. Yeah. And so it just feels really natural for me to do that.
Yeah, well, I think we all would like to say people are wearing that responsibility, and most of society is on the side of talking about it way more than being about it. How do you stay motivated in that, knowing that there's an endless amount of work, right? We're never going to get it all done. And sometimes, especially I know as much as you say yes to, right, of there's never a endless amount of things that you could say yes to. How do you stay motivated in some of those things when it gets hard, when you're facing some of these, you were on the homeless task force, right? Yeah. Stuff like that. Like, there's no solving these type of things. How do you stay motivated in the midst of an endless amount of work that needs to get done?
Yeah, I think a couple of years ago, it was a little bit of an awakening. I picked a word of the year, which we've discussed before, and my word was gratitude. And I just remember every single day I would journal about something I was grateful for. This was a few years ago, and I had a little more free time, and I had a stronger yoga practice. I would, focus my yoga practice around gratitude. And I think that's what allows me to, one, take care of myself by counting all these reasons that I have to be grateful, but it also pushes me to work and provide those same opportunities of gratitude for other people that don't have the same things that I have. So I truly do feel very grateful for a stable living environment, the ability to buy groceries when I need, I can put gas in my car. And these are things that I think have almost become we take them for granted, right? And I grew up in a family where we struggled at times and we were poor at times. And I know what it's like to not have those things that now feel very effortless for me. Yeah. So just holding on to that gratitude and the humility that I was raised with has made it easier for me to put my head down and work to provide those same opportunities and resources to individuals that don't have them. And again, that's what pushes me to do this work is I'm grateful that I have those opportunities and resources, and I want everybody to have those opportunities and resources.
Yeah. It's a big word. I mean, I talk about it all the time as if you study out success or, success isn't just money by any stretch, because we can see people every single day who have lots of money but seem very miserable, right? So if you're miserable and have money, that's not true success. That's not happiness. But gratitude is one of those common characteristic traits that you find amongst the most successful people in the world, true success. And obviously, as you build that baseline, because again, there's going to be hard times. There's going to be, especially when you put your heart on the line, you allow yourself, working at the Bishop Dudley, you see these heartbreaking things, and when you can't fix a lot of these things, that can be heartbreaking. So for everyone out there, again, I would always say everyone knows what gratitude is X, Y, Z, but I would say go a step further of like, do you have a gratitude practice? Because if you're not practicing it, it's easy to say, yeah, I'm thankful, but then you're just going all day. You have to ground yourself in that. How do you, as you get into, obviously, the reward you get back from doing so much work, because I would say almost most of the things that you do is generally thankless, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Directly, right? So you have to learn to, and that's what I think is a very unique gift of, along that path, you have to learn to self-feed from the work that you're doing, because you're not always going to get that thank you from the populations when you're like, don't you know what I'm doing for you, XYZ? That's not why you're doing it, obviously.
Yeah.
But how do you self-feed in those moments when you're not getting the direct accolades, when you feel I'm burnt out, I've given so much of my time to do XYZ? How do you pull from that to make sure that it's keeping your flames going?
Yeah, I think it's being very deeply rooted in knowing who you are and not needing that external validation, and knowing that you moved the needle on something. So I often think to myself, one of my favorite quotes is from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and he says, the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. So even at times when I feel like the work I am doing is thankless, or if I didn't see that return on my effort that I put into it, I have to believe, I truly believe in my heart, one of my very deep-rooted beliefs is knowing that the things I am doing now will ultimately help bend that arc of the moral universe towards justice. Even if I don't see it in the next week or month or year or even in my lifetime, I have to believe that the things I am doing now will lead to a better future for everyone. And that's kind of what carries me through those tough times, those thankless times, volunteering behind the scenes, doing things that you'll never get credit for is okay, as long as in the long term, it means a better community for everybody.
Yeah, that's so huge. We talk all the time. I love that you say that, know who you are. I mean, the two oldest questions I believe man has asked of ourselves is, who am I? Why am I here? Identity and purpose. And unfortunately, you've seen studies suggesting in the neighborhood of 80 to 90% of people get close to retirement without knowing what that is. And even probably a higher percentage don't know who they really are. So finding yourself grounded in knowing who you are is such a huge thing, no matter what you do for a living, because if you're solid in that, now you know your values, you know your worth, you know the things that really matter to you. So I'm assuming, talk about how does that play into your decision making? Does this align with who I am, what I believe? And though if not, it may be a good cause, but I'm assuming that allows you to say no to certain things, that this is in alignment with what I believe or what I'm trying to accomplish. How do you play that in that fine dance of who you are and the things that you could be doing?
Well, I could do everything. I often say I don't know how I will ever have a career, because I think there are so many interesting opportunities in the world.
Yeah.
I would love to be a flight attendant someday. I think that would be the raddest job. I would love to go back to do direct services with vulnerable populations. I think that's so important and impactful. So it would be really easy to say yes to a lot of things. But I think one of the ways that I stay grounded and that I remember who I am is, I'm going to back up a little bit. A few years ago, I very abruptly lost a job that I loved. And it was 4 days before a global pandemic in March of 2020. And I remember sitting in my car after losing my job, and I didn't know who I was anymore, because that job was everything to me. That job was my status. That was my income. I worked with my friends. I had a routine. It was just yanked out from under me, and I didn't know who I was anymore. Okay, so I spent the next couple of years trying to work on that and really hone in on who I was as a person and knowing what my inner core belief and value systems were. So flash forward, this was about a month ago. It was the night before the election. I remember this very clearly. And I was laying in bed, I was reading a book, and my partner was next to me and he was reading a book as well. And I just had this thought in my mind that this would be enough. If I lost my election tomorrow, I still have a partner who loves me. I still have a home to live in. I have the ability to buy groceries and put gas in my car. I have a job I can go to. I have friends that I can lean on. And it's recognizing, I think, that even with the loss of a job or a career, if that's kind of what you've built yourself around, it's reminding yourself that you still have all of these other different, very important parts of your life, and understanding that sometimes that is enough. And it's not always in the chase. It's not always in the next thing, which I think is part of the conversation around what you say yes and what you say no to. Yeah. Because if you are going to be seeking things and saying yes to things so that they add value to your life, but not recognizing the current value that you carry in your life, you're never going to feel fulfilled, I think. And you're never going to know when enough is enough because you'll always feel empty.
Yeah.
And so it's just, I think it's finding those small moments, again, of gratitude and saying this would be enough. If I didn't get everything I wanted, it would still be enough.
Yeah, this is a big deal. I think, especially in today's day and age with social media, we all know that
I hate social media.
I mean, a lot of us do in a lot of ways. I was just having some conversations we've expanded Leaders Tomorrow into Washington and Jefferson. And I was asking some of the students, we really kind of broke down pros and cons of social media. And, when we were growing up, like we're a comparison species. I mean, it's natural. It's in our DNA. But we were growing up as comparison to the kids in your high school in my neighborhood. I didn't even know what was happening across town at a different high school, like day to day. And now what that's doing to so many people in terms of unrealistic expectations, all the while they know it. Like we know it, but yet they still are sucked into that. And one thing that I would admire about your journey, especially over the last few years, of being jarred with who am I really, and it's beyond the job. Because again, the world, you ask most people, who are you? And they start with, I'm a spouse or a parent or my job title, and all these things which are labels, and never really find out who you are. Which, we talk about in Author of My Life is the real secret of success is only found through self-discovery. And what I find interesting about that is I've been studying, kind of this idea of mastery lately. And if you study the masters, Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, even the masters, Elon Musk has mastered the things he's done, to Jeff Bezos, whatever it is. If you study the masters of anything, mastery is like honing in on a thing, like let's be really great at whatever's in front of me. And I think, Leonardo da Vinci is a great example of that. Like when he went on a thing, he went on the thing. Like,
he went hard.
he went hard.
Right.
Like when he was commissioned to do the sculpture of the horses, like he went and dissected horses to study their anatomy, all for one purpose, to make the most realistic representation of a horse because it mattered in mastery. And I think obviously in today's day and age, we could really pull a lot from the playbooks of old of, we overestimate what you can get done in a year, but underestimate that 5 years. As Malcolm Gladwell kind of coined that term, 10,000-hour rule of mastery. What are people doing to lock in? If you looked at the world in this view of the next 5 years, you have time. Like, let's be clear, and especially now with medical technology, they're talking about people will start living to 120, 140. So 5 years is nothing in comparison to that. As you've gone down this road of identifying more of who you are, which then allows you to narrow your scope of the type of things you're reading, I'm assuming. Obviously, you've been through Author of My Life, you've been through Leaders Tomorrow, that self-investment. How is honing in on investing into yourself, into your skill set, not only made you better at the things you were already good at, what interested you to be more, but then at the same token, how does that add to fulfillment of life? Because it's like, I'm not trying to be somebody I'm not. I'm getting better of who I know I am and what I'm good at.
Yeah. So this will be disappointing to you, but I don't really read a lot of, I don't want to say self-help books, that's incorrect. But I don't really read a lot of autobiographical or serious books. I'm a big fan of fantasy world building novels because I think that I spend large portion of my life dealing with very, very serious things. And sometimes I just want to turn my brain off and read about dragons.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes I do that. But through the investment of myself in Author of My Life, in Leaders of Tomorrow, I think it has given me, like you said, I already knew that I wanted to be an advocate and a voice for individuals that traditionally haven't had a seat at the table.
Mm-hmm.
But what Author of My Life and Leaders of Tomorrow really, really solidified for me was confidence when I was advocating for those individuals, because I knew I'd already done my homework and I had learned what those individuals needed. I wasn't casting my own assumptions on what these community members need to be successful. By meeting with these individuals one-on-one through our quarterly table talks that we've done, where we've got to actually interact with the people that we are trying to serve and that we are trying to create resources and programs for. I have that knowledge because very similar to what you were saying about Leonardo da Vinci, he dissected the horse. We dissected the problem. We met with individuals who were suffering from chronic homelessness and addiction. We met with these service providers. I was a direct care service provider when I was at the Bishop Dudley House. So I had that knowledge. But up until I participated in Leaders of Tomorrow and Author of My Life, I always kind of second guessed my own knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I knew I was the expert in the room on that particular subject, I would still second guess what I was saying. And I think part of that comes from my youth. I'm 31. I am typically the youngest person in the room for some of these conversations.
Mm-hmm.
2, I'm a woman. And unfortunately, we still live in a time where women, and especially young women, often have their opinions and the information that they share with large groups, especially with groups of older men, can be dismissed.
Mm-hmm.
And so those were 2 really difficult hurdles for me to overcome. And I think that a lot of the tools that I gained from Author of My Life and Leaders of Tomorrow is what made that possible, that I can step into these conversations with more confidence, because I was confident, right, back in the day. But this gave me the ability to be very direct, clear, and concise with the information I was bringing and not leave any room for doubt or to be talked down to, because it's happened.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, and what I'm excited about your journey to date, and even more so, obviously, what's ahead of you, is we still do live in a society where a lot of more women, obviously, than men, that are being, doubted because of age, experience, all the various things. What would you tell that 18, 19, 20-year-old who's hungry but has a similar path as you, just didn't have the right people instilling the belief and confidence in them, which is for a lot of us where that comes from? What would you tell them? And obviously there's no golden phrase that's going to get them to get it immediately, but I think it's more about how to accelerate their process, because that's always for me is, I get asked, what would you tell a 24-year-old you? 24-year-old Tammy wouldn't listen to me today.
Yeah.
But I could say there's some things to accelerate it so they'll find out faster. What would you tell that younger generation of some things to lean into, to believe in yourself? Be clear, it's not going to just happen. There's going to be work involved, but to lean into your confidence to step into the rooms with different level of contribution.
I think I would tell them to just do it scared. You're going to be afraid. There are going to be times when you're going to have to take risks, and there's no guarantee of the outcome. And I think fear holds a lot of us back, and especially those of us who are younger, who don't have the same resources. They don't have the safety of a career that they can sit on and they can make these statements and not, and worry about being fired, or how am I going to pay my rent, or anything like that. So just do it scared. Say yes to the things that scare you. Be as prepared as you possibly can. That doesn't mean to not be prepared and just go in and be afraid. It means to prepare as much as you can, work your ass off, hustle your ass off, and then do it scared.
Yeah. That's a t-shirt.
Yeah.
Really, I mean, do it scared. I guess that's and I just speaking candidly for myself, is that because I had fear and that lack, I mean, I'm doing a lot of things now at 43, but I was capable of doing these a decade ago, but I didn't because lack of confidence. Do it scared. That it doesn't go away,
right?
But you build confidence, and once you do it before,
and that's what courage is. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is feeling the fear and doing it anyways.
Yeah. Well, speaking of scared, you stepped out to do a big thing this year.
Oh, which one?
running for state representation. That's a big deal.
Yeah.
And talk about that. Unpack that. Why?
Sure.
What was going through your head in terms of, like, when you made the decision? What were you fearful of, and how did you push through anyway?
Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about the catalyst for me running for office was actually the time I spent working at the Bishop Dudley Hospitality House. So I I can't emphasize enough how much I loved that job. I loved going into work every day. I loved getting to provide that instant gratification of helping people. You need shoes, I can give you shoes. You're hungry, I can feed you, And so much of the work we do in nonprofits is the long term. We're thinking, okay, if we start doing this now in 3 years, we can help people. And so there was that instant gratification. But despite loving my job, I would get in my car and I would cry the entire drive home every single day. And not because of the individuals I worked with and I served, but because I saw how we as a society have failed our most vulnerable community members
Mm.
and how there are not enough resources and programs to lift people out of that cycle of poverty that they often find themselves in. And so it kind of came to a head when I realized the necessity for state IDs for people who are unhoused in our community. If you want to get a job, an education, an apartment, a bank account, you need a state ID. You need something that proves you are who you say you are. And those cost $28. I had people who would panhandle all day and they would come up to me at the end of the day and say, Kaydyn, I made $13 today. Can you hold on to it until I have $28 to get a state ID so I can get a real job?
Mm.
And now with the expansion of Medicaid, we're going to have even more disenfranchised community members who don't have a state ID. And Medicaid is meant to help our most vulnerable community members, but without a state ID, they can't access it. So that being said, having a state ID is very, very important. I started paying for them out of my own pocket until my executive director found out and I got in trouble. And then I wrote a grant to a local church and they gave us a gift of $1,000 and we were able to help 33 individuals get state IDs. And of those 33, 18 of them had procured employment at the time that I left the Bishop Dudley House. So we saw this very, very small barrier being removed from people who want to work. They want to interact with society. They want to give back. It's just that initial $28 barrier. And so I was talking to a friend of mine and I said, why isn't there a law or why isn't there a box to check when I go into the DMV that says I am literally homeless, but I need an ID to prove I am who I say I am? And my best friend, who I was just ranting about this to, said, well, why don't you do it? And it seemed just batshit enough for me to be like, yeah, why don't I do it?
Mhm.
And so literally the next day I started researching what it takes to run for office. I ended up meeting with the two representatives and one senator from District 15, so Linda Duba, Jamie Smith, and Reynold Nesibo one-on-one last December. And I said to them that I was planning to run the next year, and that meant I would probably primary one of them. And they were all incredibly supportive and very helpful and gave great feedback. Jamie Smith ended up running for governor, so that seat was left open, which was very fortunate for me. But truly, it was that flash in the pan moment of if I am brave enough and if I can work up the courage to spend the next year of my life advocating for myself and for these individuals and running for office, and I get elected by some totally crazy way, if I get elected and if I win, I can bring a bill that can change people's lives. And so I take serving as a state representative very, very seriously. I think it's heavy work. We will make the laws that impact almost 1 million people across South Dakota. The power is in our hands to make people's lives easier, to make resources more accessible, especially in our rural parts of our state. So I take it very seriously. But that was the catalyst for me running, was wanting to be an advocate for our unhoused neighbors in Sioux Falls and across South Dakota, truly.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I think about obviously the amount of opportunities we have is endless, and so again, I applaud at the highest level anyone serving in that capacity. I've been approached a few times. Hey, you should run for X, and I never say never. I can say never. Well, I know where my space is at is different. But in that, as you're going down this level of daunting task and trying to tackle these type of things, what's often gets overlooked is the work it takes to get certain places, right? They don't know behind the scenes of what it really takes. And I obviously got to have a front look of it, seeing you every 2 weeks when you're an author of my life, and just hearing about the times of, I'm so tired. I worked all day. I was then campaigning at night. What I love about how you won is narrow. It wasn't by much.
97 votes.
97 votes. Now, again, I'm obviously it's elated that you won, but I'm glad it was a slim margin because it says every night where you didn't feel like it and you did it anyway, that mattered.
It was all worth it. Every night I didn't want to door knock, and I door knocked every night, 40 to 60 doors. I would door knock until it was like spooky dark out and I didn't want to knock on people's doors anymore because I didn't want to scare them. But I would stay out as late as I possibly could, and it made every night worth it. It made every interview, every time being on a podcast or in the news, or every phone call I picked up, every event I went to, it made it all worth it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because that's what's overlooked is we talk about it in LOT of the process is what do you want, what's the work, and where are the wins. And oftentimes, again, everyone likes to sit around and talk about what they want, but they're not honest about the work it takes to get there.
Yeah.
And that's the side of it of, F your feelings, again, it's that idea, like, I don't care if you feel like it or not tonight. You said you wanted this, and this is a work that's going to take to get there. Show up and do the work. And I love the fact that even on the night before, if you're like, even if I didn't win, like, I can sleep well at night knowing I did everything that I could. And that's that definition of laying it all on the line is huge, which is a story for anybody who's saying, again, identify it. It's going to take work.
Yeah. I would also say, just kind of going back to our earlier conversation around social media, and we all post our highlight reel, it would have been very easy to fall into the trap of comparing myself to other candidates in different races, because we all kind of had our strengths and we all kind of had the lanes that we were in. But there are times when I would look at my opposing Republican candidates and I would just think to myself, I know they're not out door knocking. I know that they are not meeting with individuals and constituents and having these conversations, and they could still win. They could still win because there's an R behind their name.
Yeah.
And that really just lit the fire under me. I vowed that I would outwork every single person on the ballot. And I think I did, but who knows? But I was happy.
Plus, I'm excited to see what happens next with this is that, especially, and I think having Kadyns of the world fighting these fights is huge, needed in a lot of ways. And I've been advocating on this idea, we keep making a list of these best places to live. And the reality is, again, I love my city. I'm from here, born and raised, and plan on being here for a very long time. When it gets cold like this every now and again, you're like, forever? I don't know.
I get the snowbirds now.
Yeah, I get where they're coming from. But the idea is like we're good and great in all the easy places. Now, don't get me wrong. Like what it took to be this good, we have to have a very successful city, financially well-off people, and they then work their butts off to have the finances and the wealth to give. But we see all these different things, and we're great where it's easy. The stuff that's tough, we suck like everyone else.
Yeah.
Homelessness, being a welcoming community or immigrant refugee community, justice impacted. Like in the hard areas, the muddy areas, we're really not, any better than anybody else, relatively speaking.
Right.
What are some of those areas? I know you touched on some of the homelessness stuff, but what are some of the areas that you're hoping beyond, obviously, the ID stuff? Like, what are some changes that you're hoping to make in terms of making Sioux Falls a better community?
Yeah. So I gave a speech last week, and I was asked, why I decided to run for office, and I said my response was that I ran because I love South Dakota and Sioux Falls. And because I love our city and state, I want it to be better. I think people often get confused when individuals run for office. They think it's for a negative reason because we want to change everything. And sometimes it is. There are things you want to change or improve upon. But I ran because I love our city and our state, and I want it to be the best it can possibly be. And of course, like you said, there's areas for opportunity. I would argue that we have done some really, really cool things that I think are impactful. One of them would be Safe Home, which I'm really passionate about and can talk about all day. But it's not a super palatable thing for the general community.
Yeah.
We, as a species, I think we compare ourselves to others, and that's how we measure our success, which is something we've talked about endlessly. But we also attribute other people's success to ourselves being denied something. Because if they get something, that means I don't get it. We don't often realize there's enough pie for everybody. So I think there are cool things being done in our city. Never enough, right? We're
Yep.
never going to solve some of the big issues, but I do think there are really cool things being done. We just need the larger population of Sioux Falls to wrap their arms around those vulnerable individuals when it's not fun and it's not shiny and clean and happy. These are hard things to do, and they often are thankless, like you mentioned. But I think that if we can kind of get back into that spirit of we're all working together to make the best city possible. So to answer your question, what are some things that I think would be great to help Sioux Falls? So I would actually just requested language for a bill to remove the pink tax, which is sales tax on menstrual products across our state. I think that would make it a lot more accessible for low income women and their children and those families in the community. And I also just put in a request to find out how much it would cost for us to make all school lunches in public schools free for students across South Dakota. So that's been a huge topic of conversation in Sioux Falls, with the student lunch debt just going over $106,000, and the Sioux Falls School District saying they're no longer going to be providing hot lunches to students that don't have the appropriate paperwork turned in. I don't believe that students should be punished for the mistakes of their parents. We know how having access to healthy, fresh food affects the brain development of adolescents, and I don't know why we would punish these children that are already struggling and are probably not in the best, or I mean, their families might be struggling, but they might have a home life that's a little bit more difficult. And so we're going to ostracize them even further from their peers by clearly serving them something different for lunch than what all their peers are getting, and adding that kind of shame and that loss of dignity to these kids. And that's what they are. They are children who are being punished through no fault of their own. And I think that's embarrassing, I think, for South Dakota and Sioux Falls.
Yeah, there's a lot of those areas, and I get it. I think there's two sides of the coin that we have to really go down in this. Is that we have to, help the populations that we're trying to serve understand there are a lot of people out here trying to do the work, because it's
Right.
easy to fall into that nobody cares, no one's doing anything, and that's not the case, right? There's some really great organizations and people
Right.
committed to doing some of this work, but the same token, it's how do we connect the rest of our community to say, like, if that was your niece or nephew, you would never allow that to happen,
Right.
And that's the idea of, especially around the Midwest nice, and we talk about those type of things. How do we get into the space of, like, what is the identity we really want to have in our community?
Right. And I think that my ideal world is we move away from scarcity. I want everyone to feel an overabundance. I often talk about how I don't want our school systems in South Dakota to be fully funded. I want them to be overfunded. I want our teachers and our teacher aides, and I want our students to have more resources than they can ever dream of. And that includes healthy food that they can eat every day. And I think it's that personal attachment to something that might never affect you. God willing, will never be homeless in Sioux Falls. But that doesn't mean that I don't want there to be an overabundance of resources and programs for people who are homeless and people who are going through that journey. Just because it will never personally affect me doesn't mean that should limit me advocating for them and supporting them and raising awareness around those issues.
Yeah, that's a big deal. That's
Yeah.
a big deal. So my last question is around this topic of success, because it's a big one, varies from person to person, but the best definition that we talk about in LOT that I've ever heard of is a worthy ideal pursued persistently with courage. So we're about to enter a new year, 2023. What is a worthy ideal that you're going after, that you're willing to pursue? Persistence to overcome, there's going to be obstacles, but what's kind of that big, hairy, audacious thing? What's the worthy ideal that you're going to pursue with courage, regardless of the obstacles, knowing that when you set your mind to something, you're going to get it?
Yeah, I actually just did the weirdest thing like 2 weeks ago. So I'll share it with you. I was thinking to myself that since I don't have to campaign next year, I'm going to have a lot of free time in the summer. And what should I do with that free time? So I signed up and registered to get my private pilot's license. So next summer, I will be getting my private pilot's license out of Legacy Aviation in T. So that's what I'll be doing all summer in the evenings instead of door knocking.
Nice.
And that is a big, audacious, hairy goal. It's expensive. It's not super attainable. It's expensive. You have to save up your money, and there's a lot of hours behind it and a lot of brain power, but it's something I wanted to do for a long time. And I'm not afraid of a lot in my life. But something that truly haunts me is the idea of waking up one day and I'm 70 and I'm retired and I look back with regret. That haunts me.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, just do things scared, right? But that fear is what drives me. And that's why I say yes to a lot of weird, crazy, cool opportunities, because I can't let down 70-year-old Kadyn, and I can't let down 15-year-old Kadyn that would have thought this was rad as hell.
Yeah. That's huge. I love that. I think, so many people, aren't even aspiring to live whatever their best life would look like because they've never taken time to think about it. And that's amazing in a world where we all have time, right? The busy is not an excuse, because if it was important, you'd find time. Like when you got COVID and you're sitting down for 10 days, quarantine, all of a sudden the world kept moving, X, Y, Z. Time is there when it's a priority. And so going after those things, do it scared.
I don't know. Yeah. But you know what? Here's the thing. I think busy is a very easy excuse for us to stay instead of saying we're afraid.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, people love to talk about all the things that they would do, and then they give a lot of excuses. But I think ultimately so many of those excuses boil down to fear. Because what if I put myself out there? What if I risk it for the biscuit and I put 100% of myself into this and I still lose?
Yes.
And sometimes it's easier just to stay small and to not try and to not risk that failure. And with social media, it can be very public failure.
Yes.
It's just easier to stay small.
Yeah.
And we blame it on excuses instead of just saying, I'm too afraid.
Yeah.
And so again, it comes full circle back to that. Just do it scared, because you're either scared you're going to fail or you're scared you're going to succeed. Either one, just take a risk.
Yeah. Take a risk. I mean, you either get results or you have excuses.
I've already sworn. Can I swear on this?
Have at it.
Okay. So there's a band, and the title of the band is Fiddlar, Fidlar. And the acronym, my best friend and I say this all the time, the acronym is Fuck It Dog, Life's a Risk. And I think that all the time, because being alive is a risk.
Mm-hmm.
So why not just go for it?
Yeah. Well, I'm in the same boat as you, of haunted by, I think about my grandfather, seeing him in a nursing home and seeing people that just get wheeled out, and you see regret. Mm-hmm. And they can't go back and mend those relationships. They can't go back. I mean, even now when a lot of people, reminisce, I had a friend of mine get married a few months ago, and he's seen a lot of friends you haven't seen in a long time, and like there's a handful of them that just couldn't get past reminiscing the way it was back when X. And I'm like, yeah, okay, we can reminisce for like a few minutes, but like, what are we doing now? What's exciting? And you see how many people just get caught up in the what was versus like truly living, and you see so many people existing versus living.
I don't reminisce a lot because I really believe every year has gotten better.
Yeah.
It truly has. Every year I've had just better and better experiences and friends and relationships and opportunities. And so I look back on those times, in high school, and I don't really look back on high school, in college and, my early 20s, and they were cool times, but I have so many cooler opportunities now and cool things that I get to say yes to. So yeah, I don't really reminisce a lot about the past. I'm very in the now and the future.
It's what it's after. You're pursuing something persistently with courage. And so I appreciate you dropping some wisdom on folks. Again, I think you have, for obviously a lot of folks may not know all the things you do because you just do the thing. And so as we get to watch you grow, thrive, make huge contributions to our community, I would encourage folks to reach out, get to know this amazing woman. And
if you live in District 15, you have a direct line to me as my constituent. Give me a call, send me an email. I would love to learn what's important to you in our district.
Yes, all the good stuff. And so I appreciate you in so many ways, and just applaud you at the highest level for being courageous, stepping forward, and just being a badass.
Well, thank you. Yeah. It takes a badass to know a badass.
Yeah, I love it. Well, thank you guys. And thank you guys. See you guys next episode of Success Mindset.